What's up, y'all? Let's dive into John Wayne Gacy's Human Design Energy. I'm Sable Danielle, a human design coach, and let's dive right in. So, John Wayne Gacy is a well-known serial killer. He's known for his violent and disturbing crimes, and he is a manifestor in human design. So, I want to dive into his energy so human design can help us understand and give us a glimpse into the energy that fueled his anger and his murdering spree. So in this video, we're going to dive into some of his centers, some of the gates, and how his energy impacted his violent tendencies. So, like I stated earlier, John Wayne Gacy is a manifestor, and in human design, manifestors make up about 8 to 9% of the population. They are natural born initiators. They are unique. They're rare. They have unique, they're here to spark unique creative inspirations. And they often are misunderstood because their thoughts aren't they're usually ahead of their time. And when manifestors are maneuvering through life and they're not self-emotion or being unbalanced and not honoring their human design, their not self-emotion is anger. And so that definitely can play into the energy and everything that happened with John Wayne Gacy in his murdering spree. So let's dive a little bit more into that. Manifestors also, when unaligned and they're not honoring their energy, they can be angry, they can be control freaks, they don't like being told what to do, so anybody who challenges them is a problem. And if they have, let's say they have a defined emotional solar plexus center and they're a manifestor, then that means that they're an extremely emotional manifestor. So we'll dive a little bit deeper to see how his centers also affected his energy. But going a little further, his manifestor energy probably contributed to his need for control and him being unaligned. Anger was the way that he expressed himself, especially if he felt challenged or blocked or, somebody got in his way. To understand John Wayne Gacy's energy and behavior, we also need to look at the different centers that he has defined in his energy, because this will show how he processes his emotions and power and his identity. And so John Wayne Gacy has an undefined head center, which means he wasn't born with consistent, reliable energy in his head center. So he takes in and amplifies the energies around him. He's extremely influenced by the external energies and pressures around him, and that can also affect the way he thinks and processes information, especially if he's not taking time to, ground himself and learn his energy and how to manage his energy. And so also having an undefined head center, he could have had a lot of external pressures that were influenced by his environment. He often probably absorbed the thoughts and ideas of others, which could have led to a lot of confusion and instability in the way that he thought. And it could have also provided a lack of clarity in his mind, which could have contributed to his distorted view of the world and also his inability to process his thoughts. So John Wayne Gacy also has a defined throat center, and so this played a role in his energy because he was able to express himself verbally in a way that captivated people. People with defined throat centers are good storytellers. They have a reliable, consistent way of speaking. They have a way of captivating the audience in ways that other people don't. And when they speak, it usually, holds a lot of weight and grabs a lot of attention. And so he probably used this to his advantage because he had a double life as a respected businessman, and then he also was a serial killer. So, a lot of that being able to be smooth and talk to people, talk his way out of people, be charismatic, that more than likely came from his defined throat center. He has an undefined identity center, which means that he didn't have a strong, reliable sense of self or purpose or direction in life. So he could have struggled with who he was or had a lot of insecurities about what he is meant to do, what his purpose is, who he is. And that could have contributed to having like a false persona or needing to control the narrative about who he is to others, which would have masked dark impulses or just allowed him to appear to people how he wanted to appear to them, basically. He also has a defined emotional solar plexus center. So like I said earlier, a manifestor plus a defined emotional solar plexus center, not a manifestor, unbalanced, unhealed, unhealthy manifestor, who has suffers with mental instabilities, maybe has some mental issues, plus in a defined emotional solar plexus center is not a really great combination if you're not going to take time to manage your emotions, learn your emotions, and understand how to process so you're not just overtaken by anger and your impulses. Okay, but let's dive in a little bit. So he has a defined emotional solar plexus center, which means he was born with consistent, reliable emotions and emotional awareness within him. And he can go from 0 to 100 really quick. He has very strong, intense, emotional outbursts when he is in his emotions. So his emotions also likely fluctuated between extreme highs and very extreme lows, which created huge emotional volatility. And so without a healthy outlet for these emotions, without having a way to understand these emotions and process these emotions, this could have been a reason why he turned violent. His anger turned violent, and that was the way that he released his pent-up anger and frustration and emotional tension, unfortunately. So let's dive into some of the gates that he has defined. And specifically right now we're going to dive into the gates he has defined in his emotional solar plexus center. He has gate 36 defined, which is the gate of crisis and turbulence, and it's all about emotional turbulence. John Wayne Gacy's emotional crises likely triggered violent outbursts because of this gate, especially when he's overwhelmed by his intense emotions. He had an inability to cope with his emotional waves without having a healthy, proper way to release his emotions without being destructive to himself and his community, society, the people around him. He also has gate 6 defined, which is the gate of conflict, and this also heightened his sensitivity to his emotions and emotional conflict. This gate could have made him reactive to anything that, triggered his emotions, anything he perceived as an emotional disturbance, which would have led to intense anger and tension that he wasn't able to work through, and he used that in inappropriate ways. He lashed out. So also in his identity center, he has gate 10 defined, which is the gate of self-love and behavioral patterns. And this is about how we behave based on our sense of self-worth. And so his undefined G center, also known as the undefined identity center, this gate likely created distorted self-behavior patterns, which led him to seek validation through controlling others, which, kind of shows through his actions and the inappropriate things that he chose to do. So his lack of self-love may have driven him to devalue the lives of, his victims, unfortunately. So John Wayne Gacy's manifestor energy, when unaligned, turned into anger, and he also had controlling issues. His emotional up and downs represented by his defined emotional solar plexus, plus his need for control through his defined will center, led him down a path of destruction and violence and just horrible things. And so his constant struggle with his undefined identity pushed him to probably assert his dominance in dangerous and violent ways. His defined throat center gave him the ability to manipulate others through his speech and charisma, which gave him the ability to deceive his victims, his community, and everybody around him. Ultimately, his dark energy, shaped by, the gates that he had defined in his energy, as well as the centers he has defined in his energy, without understanding them and learning to process in a healthy way, led him to horrible acts, which also was fueled by his desire for power and control. And ultimately that led to him being known as a serial killer, one of the most notorious serial killers. So now, hopefully, you understand through human design how unaligned, mismanaged energy as a manifester, how that like shows in his energy and how it contributed to his violent behavior. So I'm not blaming him being a manifester. Not every manifester with a defined emotional solar plexus center and those defined gates are going to be a serial killer or be super violent. However, it's just interesting to look at where the energy comes from in certain people's actions, especially if you look at multiple people and you start to see a habit or like a trend or something common in multiple things. So this is just an entertaining video. I'm not calling all manifestors violent or anything, but this is a call to be aware of your energy and just have some fun in the month of October in the spirit of Halloween. So I'll catch y'all in the next video.